Okay. Greeting friends from wherever you are. Welcome to the international webinar Ambassadors and Young Leaders Week 2020 with me Mutiara Syifa from PERPIKA, who will accompany our great speakers and moderators as the masters of ceremonies during this event. The theme of this event will discuss breakthrough against COVID-19, diplomacy and bilateral collaboration in dealing with global crisis focused on humanities topic. This event will take over 2 hours from 8 until 10 p.m. Jakarta time, which will be moderated by Mr. Hafizd Alharomain Lubis from PPMI Mesir for the first session and Mrs. Zhafira Aqyla from PPI Jepang for the second session. For your information, this event aims to simulate a sense of awareness of the significance of international competitiveness, extensive networking, and global collaborations among Indonesian people. The ultimate goal of this event is to overcome the present day global crisis and seek for an opportunity to lead the world. Furthermore, please allow me to introduce our great speakers for today's sessions. The first, we have Mr. Andi Rachmianto, Ambassador of Indonesia to Jordan and Palestine. Second, we have Mr. Wajid Fauzi, Ambassadors of Indonesia to Suriah. Third, we have Mr. Sidharto Reza Suryodipuro, Ambassador of Indonesia to India. Before we begin, I would like to inform you that in this event we are also raising funds for COVID-19, especially for our medical team who are at the front in fighting COVID-19. If you want to donate, please refer to bank account number or scan the QR code as shown below or on your screen. Okay, thank you very much to all of you that have contributed to this to the donation. Without further ado, I will pass the event to our moderator, Mr. Hafizd and Zhafira. The stage is yours.
Thank you, Master of Ceremony, for the time. Greetings. My name is Hafizd Alharomain Lubis.
And my name is Zhafira Aqyla. In this session today, Mr. Hafizd will moderate our first session today with their Excellencies Mr. Andi Rachmianto as the Ambassador of the Republic of Indonesia to Jordan and Palestine, and Mr. Wajid Fauzi as the Ambassador of the Republic Indonesia to Syria. Following their session, I will continue and moderate the second session with Mr. Sidharto Reza Suryodipuro as the Ambassador of Indonesia to India and Bhutan.
Okay, before that, I will read our event background before our honorable speakers deliver their presentation. This session aims to analyze the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic to the ongoing humanity crisis occurring in many parts of the Middle East. Before COVID-19 created an infodemic or the abundant sharing of information on the pandemic on social media, issues in the Middle East have already received the barest minimum of coverage from the media, thus very little attention from the rest of the world. As a result, the world is currently turning a blind eye on the other crises from the world. Furthermore, states tied in bilateral relations with countries that suffer humanity crisis are failing to provide support due to intensive demands from their own countries to reallocate all resources to flatten the curve, thus weakening the existing bilateral ties and in consequence, driving humanity crisis in Middle East into a new height of emergency. In this session, speakers are expected to.
Okay, in this session, speakers are expected to first present the current situation of humanity crisis from the respective countries in relation to the damaging impact of COVID-19 and whether the pandemic is expected to improve or worsen the occurring human crisis. Secondly, speakers are also expected to identify the main challenges their countries face in overcoming the humanity crisis previously discussed. and then to also discuss the role of first the media, and to also discuss the role of human rights activist groups in supporting the recovery from the crisis and the pandemic. And then they'll also be expected to discuss the humanity issues or the humanitarian issues faced in Indonesia and present a comparative analysis on the crisis between two countries. And lastly, they'll also be expected to elaborate in what ways countries can learn from one another in overcoming crisis and highlight what can be implemented specifically in Indonesia for its national development. Moving on to Mr. Hafizd.
Okay, and also there will be a question and answer session and discussion with the speakers after the presentation. For those who have questions, please write your name and your country or region, followed by your question. We will choose the best question from the audience, from the speakers to answer. Without waiting any longer, I would like to give the time to our first speaker, Mr. Andi Rachmianto, to deliver his presentation. Mr. Andi Rachmianto.
Mr. Andi Rachmianto, time is yours. Okay, we just had an information that currently Mr. Andi Rachmianto is not with us. I see, all right.
Probably have the connection issues.
If we may, Mr. Hafizd, should we move on and address the presentation from Mr. Wajid first?
Okay, Mr. Wajid, are you there? Mr. Wajid? Are you with us?
All right.
Okay.
Let's go ahead and start with Mr. Wajid. Are you ready, Mr. Wajid?
It's me first?
Yes. Is that okay with you? All right. For His Excellency, Mr. Wajid, time is yours.
The stage is yours.
Okay. Thank you so much. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Nahmaduhu wa nasta'inuhu wa nastaghfiruh. A'udzu billahi min sururi anfusina wa min sayyiati a'malina. Wassalatu wassalamu ala sayyidina Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in. My distinguished chairman of Overseas Indonesian Association, the moderators, my fellow ambassadors, distinguished participants, saudara-saudara sekalian, adik-adik saya yang saya cintai, saya hormati, dan saya banggakan. First of all, I would like to extend my profound gratitude to the committee of the webinar who grant me this excellent opportunity to share with you the Indonesian effort in Syria to nurture and enhance the friendship and bilateral collaboration with the topic of humanity. But my dear adik-adik saya yang saya hormati, para anggota PPI, before I continue, allow me to use this opportunity to congratulate. Let us use this opportunity also to congratulate Ambassador Andi Rachmianto, who just appointed as Director General for Protocol and Consular Affairs of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Indonesia, who concurrently also our Chief of State Protocol of Indonesia. I myself and the entire staff of the Embassy of Indonesia in Damascus join the prayer. May God Almighty, Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, always bless Pak Andi with the health and happiness and successful in your new undertakings. Now back to our topic. I will try my best to use this forum to brief you the connection between Syria, humanity, and the Indonesian diplomacy. Now, let us start with the first one, the situation in Syria. Talking about Syria on the present time, it can be summarized into three different aspects, namely conflict, COVID-19, and Caesar Acts, or we can simply call them three Cs. The C number one, it's conflict. The conflict in Syria are multidimensional, involving numerous actors. The conflict was started as an internal conflict, but later on the progress, on the development, it involved other entities, countries, many countries, even many countries. The initial cause of the conflict was demanding economic reform due to the economic situation, due to the shortage of job opportunity, but later and now metamorphed to political conflict, namely to change the existing government. The nature of the conflict become more and more sensitive when some actors use the ideology or religious belief as their main issues to involve the internal conflict in Syria. The embassy, the members of the embassy were and are witnessing the physical combat, skirmishes, or even war between among those conflicting actors. My dear participant, after 9 years, you can imagine how the conflict turned into humanitarian catastrophe for Syria. Name it, shortage of water, damaged infrastructure, shortage of energy, shortage of food, internet, and other things that made some Syrians become refugees and internally displaced persons. In this very difficult situation, unexpectedly, the C number two comes, the pandemic of COVID-19. Based on the embassy's observation, the government of Syria tried its best to limit the impact of COVID-19, considering the shortage of the health infrastructure, the shortage of health infrastructure and facilities. The government of Syria has taken some restrictive policies even before the first case emerged, such as imposing very strict curfew, limitation of movement of people, the closure of public spaces, educational institution, and park and restaurant. And we'll see up to today, the case emerged is less than 300 across Syria. 9 deaths and 102 recovered from the virus. And as Ambassador of Indonesia, I pray and thanks God, Alhamdulillah, until now, so far, no Indonesian citizen infected with the virus, Alhamdulillah. In the midst of Syrian economic difficulties, the government still maintained to provide subsidy, providing staple food, bread for free of charge to the people. While the people are dealing with the conflict and pandemic, the C number 3 is arriving. It is now arriving. It is the Caesar Act, Syrian Civil Act imposed by the government of the United States since 10 days ago, June 17, 2020. The act, the new bill imposed by the United States has worsened the economic situation, has worsened the existing unilateral sanction from the US since 2004. So it is not difficult to imagine that it is very difficult for Syria to cope with another sanction amid of conflict, pandemic, and economic situation. The sanction is clearly designated to cripple strategic sector of Syria by restricting any entities, individual or companies, to deal with Syria in so many sectors, sector of industry, sector energy, construction, aviation, and furthermore, any actor at any level who give material, finance, and technical support for Syrian government will also be sanctioned as well. So this is exactly will prevent the economic recovery and, of course, slowing down rebuild process of Syria. My dear participant, these three C's are the main feature to understand briefly the humanitarian situation in Syria. Observing the three main features, I try to put this into three questions. Namely, what lesson can be learned? What can we do and what to behave? Let us start with the first question. What lesson can we learn? What can we learn from this situation? As Indonesian, or as the people of Indonesia, we are witnessing and we are blessed with political and economic stability that enable us to maintain internal politics and perform our free and active foreign policy that put Indonesia as a friendly country in the global world. The second one, with the stability and the economic potential that Indonesia have, we need to grab the opportunity. Please forward to the following slide. We need to grab the opportunity to develop Indonesia to become advanced, to become excellent country in the global arena. And very important lesson learned, we have to glue, to tighten our unity and prioritizing the national interest rather than personal interest. So what we can do? What we can do? Again, we have to be very grateful since Indonesia. We have to be bersyukur yang banyak. Very grateful since Indonesia are blessed with political and economic stability in which we can nurture our 3D. Put it in the following slide. We can nurture our 3D. We can nurture our diversity. We can promote our democracy, and lastly, we are able to undertake our development. With the imposing of Caesar Act to Syria, as I said earlier, it is not easy for Indonesia to engage with economic activities in Syria. However, in this regard, Indonesia keep maintaining its friendly relationship with Syria. The relationship between Indonesia and Syria established as early as the beginning of Indonesia's independence, since 1947, and as one of the form closed its embassy in Damascus since 1955 until now. Even during the conflict, Indonesia maintained and enhanced the existing friendly relationship in various sectors, namely politics, economic, and social culture. Indonesia also enhancing encouraging the people-to-people contact by inviting Syrian to Indonesian embassies activities, as well as sending Syrian to Indonesia with the hope that they will speak about Indonesia in many platforms in Syria, in social media, in their own environment. Well, in other forum, in the multilateral forum, the position of Indonesia is clear. respecting the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Syria, and upholding the principle of non-intervention. So in this regard, Indonesia supported UN Secretary General appeal to the access of Syrian to basic need and medical need. As I said earlier, the basic tenet of Indonesian foreign policy is to respect the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Syria. And in line with this, my dear participant, my dear member of PPI Dunia, if you listen or if you have any information, if there is humanitarian assistance from Indonesia to Syria, I suggest that it should be undertaken on the coordination with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Indonesia, as well as the Embassy of Indonesia in Damascus. And lastly, responding with this situation, what to behave as Indonesian, what to behave as Indonesian. From what we discussed, allow me to propose my humble suggestion for us as Indonesian to always first work very hard and strive our effort, regardless of our position, our capacity, or our designation. For what? To develop Indonesia into a great and excellent country. Great and advanced country. To the spirit of entrepreneurship to reach maximum benefit to the people of Indonesia. And the last one, as Indonesian, we have to uphold good ethic, high morality, or akhlakul karimah, so we can prove to the global community that the people of Indonesia are the people with good ethic and akhlakul karimah, respecting each other, promoting tolerance, and fasabikul khairats, competing each other to strive our effort to the development of Indonesia. I end my statement and I welcome if there is any question. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, our honorable speakers, Mr. Wajid Fauzi, for the presentation. Let me, as the moderator, express the key points from what Mr. Wajid Fauzi said as in the presentation. The first one, the current situation in Syria can conclude it into 3C. Syria is still remain facing a conflict, facing internal conflict, and also it is relating to religion issues, and civil war is also still occur in Syria. And second is COVID-19. Syria is also still or remain facing COVID-19. And the last is facing Caesar's Act. And the second point, the key point, humanitarian crisis is also affected the economic sectors in Syria, also affected in industry, also furthermore, the finance. Also, this point is also preventing the economic recovery in Syria, the people, and also the national stability. And then the third, Indonesia must constantly implementing the 3G. Indonesia have to be grateful, seizing the opportunity, and then the third is binding our unity. And then the last key point that I got from Mr. Wajid Fauzi's presentation, what do we grateful from our country? Indonesia has 3D. Indonesia is still being development country. we live in almost prosperity than Syria. And then the second, we live in democracy country. And then we live in a country that embrace the diversity. Okay, thank you, Mr. Wajid Fauzi, for your presentation. And now, next, we will move on to our second speaker. Is Mr. Andi Rachmianto is with us?
Yeah.
Hello?
Testing, okay. Yeah.
Okay, honorable speakers, Mr. Andi Rachmianto. Okay, before Mr. Andi Rachmianto deliver his presentation, I would also like to remind you there will be a question and answer sessions and discussion with the speakers after the presentation. For those who have a question, please write your name and your country or region, followed by your question. We will choose the best question from the audience for the speakers to answer. Okay, without waiting any longer, to Mr. Andi Rachmianto, the stage is yours, sir.
Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Moderators, Mas Hafizd and Mbak Zhafira. Let me first to call my fellow ambassadors, Ambassador Wajid Fauzi, for his kind words addressed to me for my new assignment, and also my dear brother, Ambassador Suryodipuro. But first of all, let me thank you for having me to participate in this webinar focusing on diplomacy and bilateral collaboration in dealing with global crisis during the pandemic of COVID-19. And I wish to congratulate PPI Dunia for organizing the first ever Ambassador Week and Young Leaders event. I think this is to show that young generation, particularly students around the world, as our future leader, has deep concern on global problem to find a global solution. Let me start by giving you some update what's happening in Jordan. Well, actually, Jordan gradually returned to normal life after the government announced to resume economic activities and to put an end of the movement restrictions after more or less 3 months of lockdown measures. On June 4, 2020, for example, the government lowered the indicator of epidemiology severity to level 4 out of 5, namely moderate risk. And this is following a significant decrease in the number of internal infections within the last 14 days, with the number of new cases doesn't exceed 10 cases per day. With the population of about 10.3 million, the number of confirmed cases in Jordan now it's about 1,111. Since the first case was found on the 2nd of March 2020, I think Indonesia and Jordan, we found the first case about the same time. 840 people have recovered, and so far, alhamdulillah, only 9 cases of death have been found as of 27 June 2020. On March 17th, King Abdullah II imposed what we call it a national defense law. I think this is the only martial law to be imposed during the pandemic around the world. And this gives the government sweeping powers to enforce a state of emergency, and followed by closing all of its borders, all of its airspace, including, of course, to impose round-the-clock movement of restriction and curfew. The Jordanian government has avoided responding to the pandemic using the herd immunity approach, as it is considered inconsistent with Jordan's traditional and custom values. According to a survey conducted by one of the strategic institute of the University of Jordan, for example, the vast majority of Jordanians believe that the government has taken the right decisions to tackle the pandemic, 90% of them welcome the government decision. Another point that I would like to raise, since the beginning of the pandemic, President Joko Widodo and of course the Foreign Minister Retno Marsudi have instructed all Indonesian mission abroad, including of course the Indonesian embassy here in Amman, to focus its mission to serve and protect Indonesian citizens living abroad who have been severely impacted by the pandemic. So this is actually the humanity part of Indonesian diplomacy during pandemic of COVID-19. For example, since the last 3 months, we have repatriated more than 120,000 Indonesian citizens from more than 52 countries back to Indonesia. They of course include 87,000 citizens from Malaysia, more than 9,000 people through self-repatriation program, and more than 24,500 Indonesian crew, or ABK we call it, both from cruise ship and also fishing vessels, and almost 400 members of Jamaah Tabligh. Aside from that, of course, the Indonesian government, through its embassies and consulate around the world, we have provided logistical and medical assistance, as well as cash assistance to more than 519,000 Indonesians abroad. The Indonesian embassy in Amman, we also have done a similar effort by providing more than 1,600 packages of humanitarian assistance to more than 600 Indonesians who have been severely affected by the pandemic, mostly migrant workers and also students. Let me also touch upon to update you on the situation in Palestine, since I also cover the state of Palestine. The current pandemic situation in Palestine is less fortunate actually compared to Jordan. Palestine is now facing the second wave of outbreak after the government lifted the movement of restrictions measures since 27th of May. As of now, the number of infection cases increased almost twofold, with the total confirmed cases amounting more than 2,000 cases. However, so far only 7 cases of deaths have been reported. With about 5.5 million population, both in West Bank and Gaza, the number of cases of death is pretty small. This happened maybe because Palestinians have been used to face a dire and serious situation after more than 53 years under the occupation by Israel. So they are more resilient to fight the pandemic compared to its occupying power. For example, in Israel now, the number of cases reached more than 23,000, with more than 315 people died. However, I want to underline this, despite all countries and governments are still struggling in dealing and fighting with COVID-19 pandemic based on humanity, there is one country, only a single country, namely Israel, based on inhumanity and injustice, is still planning to exercise its expansionist and colonialist policy through the annexation part of the West Bank and Jordan Valley. This policy of annexation is illegal. It contravenes the international law, including the relevant Security Council resolution, and therefore it has been universally rejected by the United Nations, by the European Union, by the OISAA countries, by the Arab League, and the rest of the world, both governments and non-government organizations, except one, the United States, or to be precise, the Trump administration. What would be the challenges and opportunities actually we are facing now? According to some experts, COVID-19 has caused the worst humanitarian crisis since World War II. According to World Food Program, for example, coronavirus could be doubled could double, number of people in famine and crisis from 135 million to 256 million. However, what is interesting to observe, Jordan, as the host of more than 4 million refugees, mostly Palestinian and Syrian refugees, so far there is no single case of infection in more than 2,000 refugees camps in Jordan. I think the policy of containment and lockdown to refugee camp has been very successful. State diplomacy at the bilateral level is also expanding, not only for seeking humanitarian and medical assistance. Indonesia's diplomacy is also directed to gain accessibility and affordability to medicine and vaccine through collaboration and partnership with potential countries and companies. Lastly, what lesson learned we can get from Jordan? I think among Middle East countries, Jordan is one of the leading countries that so far has been successful in preventing the spread of COVID-19 outbreak. Some factors that make government able to prevent the spreading of the virus are its bold policy and rigorous action in the early phase of the pandemic. So after imposing martial law and curfew, for example, Jordan government publicly announced that they would take a trial and error approach to address the spread of the virus, as it was unprecedented and there was no best practices for the government to adopt. And of course, the government also took the bold decision, for example, to suspend its economic sector, including the tourism sector, which has been the main engine for Jordan economy. So maybe this is something that I would like to share for the time being, so we can continue with the question and answer after this session. Thank you very much for your attention. So let me get back to the moderators. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, our honorable speakers, Mr. Andi Rachmianto, for your presentation. Let me ask the moderator express the key points that Mr. Andi Rachmianto has given to us. The first one, so far, our Ministry of Foreign Affairs has repatriated over 120,000 Indonesian from overseas. And then the second, and also in diplomatic, relation between Indonesia and the foreign countries, Indonesia is also providing a logistic and also providing humanitarian activities. And then the third, current situation in Palestine. Palestine is now facing the second wave of COVID-19 pandemic. But in this situation, the Palestine is same as the situation that they face in Syria. And then the fourth, the current government in Palestine is still in dealing in COVID-19 pandemic, except the annexation issues that occurred from Israel nowadays. And then the last one, what lesson we can learn from Jordan? Jordan is one of the most successful countries to overcome the pandemic through their policy. Okay, next. Thank you for honorable speakers, Mr. Andi Rachmianto. For the next, I will give the time for my friend, Ms. Zhafira Aqyla, to guide our next great speakers. Ms. Zhafira Aqyla?
Yes.
Okay, the time is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you to my friend, Mr. Hafizd, for giving me the time. Greetings to all of our audience at home. Thank you so much for coming in and joining us today. My name is Zhafira Aqyla from PPMI Japan, and I will moderate our last session with His Excellency Mr. Sidharto Reza Suryodipuro, as the Ambassador of the Republic of Indonesia to India and Bhutan. As a reminder to all of our audience watching from home, there will be a Q&A session and discussion with the speakers after the presentation. For those who have a question, please write down your name, your country and region, followed by to who the question is designated to. And we will choose the best question from the audience for the speakers to answer. Without waiting any longer, we invite the third speaker, Mr. Sidharto, His Excellency Mr. Sidharto, to deliver his presentation. To Mr. Sidharto, can you join us?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Mr. Sidharto,
All
would you
right.
be able to... Thank you very
Can
much.
you see me now?
Yes, I can see you now. All right, Mr. Sidharto, time is yours.
All right. Thank you very much. Let me begin by greeting my good friend, Ambassador Andi Rachmianto, and to congratulate him. I also wish to greet Ambassador Wajid Fauzi in Syria. Mungkin, yeah. I'd like to greet also the PPI organizers for this event. Selamat malam, selamat siang, selamat pagi untuk saudara-saudara semua di berbagai belahan dunia. Salam sejahtera untuk semua. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. It's a pleasure for me to be joining this event, this Ambassador and Young Leaders Week virtual discussion. I'd like to congratulate PPI Dunia, Overseas Indonesian Students Association Alliance, for initiating this. Platforms like this can help the younger generation to come up with ideas, to work in bringing a breakthrough to the crisis we are facing now, but also to prepare them for the many crises that will likely to happen in the future. The world community is in this together, facing an extraordinary situation. We are grappling with the disease to find the best way to deal with it. COVID-19 has paralyzed livelihoods across but a few economic sectors. We have to live in a new normal. There are, of course, silver lines to the COVID-19 dark clouds. For one, we are reminded of how wonderful nature is. I know in Delhi, we have been seeing more blue skies now than the almost 3 years I've been here. We are reminded how interrelated our health is with the health of the environment. We have gained renewed understanding of the fragility of humans before nature. Now, we know that no country has experienced a pandemic of this magnitude. There is no silver bullet or magic formula for addressing and mitigating it. Different countries take different prescriptions. A country may begin with loose social limitations, another with a complete lockdown, and other countries taking measures in between the spectrum. There are examples of countries that have kept their economic activities humming, keeping schools and public spaces open, while preparing their health facilities and undertaking other precautions. I think in Indonesia itself, we also have, we undertook some social limitations, some limited lockdowns, but we try also at the same time to balance it with economic activities. I know there are a lot of criticism to that. However, living in India with a completely different experience, I can with confidence say that really there is no magic formula to this. Balancing between life and livelihood. India is an example of a country going into a complete lockdown. People were asked to stay at home and all travels ceased. And I mean all. No flights, no domestic flights, no international flights, no trains. Practically all form of travels had ceased with the exception of very few activities. This was until early June. The impact on the economy has been immense. it was particularly difficult choice to make, as the Indian economy was already in a downturn even before the pandemic. India made the clear choice between life and livelihood. Its choice was to limit the spread of the pandemic while the country prepared its health facilities and geared up its pharmaceutical and other relevant industries to address the pandemic. Looking at the various experiences that countries face, we already heard earlier two experiences, Syria and Jordan. And I'm sure all of you would also know of the experience that the country you are in are facing. I think a number of lessons can be drawn from our common experience, which will be important for humanity in addressing future crises of such magnitude. I don't think any country can take the moral high ground in the fight of the pandemic. All of us are living with a new situation. The first lesson is that the pandemic has laid bare inequalities. The poor is the hardest hit by the pandemic. They are the ones to first lose their means of livelihood and likely to have the least of support. The view of the millions of Indian migrant workers walking hundreds, perhaps thousands of kilometers back to their hometowns, and subsequently the imperative of bringing them back to their employment in cities, underlines the importance of such a support system. The central government of India and the state governments have arranged special trains and buses, food and shelters for migrant workers after the first experience of seeing millions of them walking to return to their villages. But let me just remind that while India is unique, it is also not the only one. Even the richest country in the world saw its unemployment rate surge to more than 14%. I'm talking about the United States, to 14%, and one of perhaps highest in its history. In Indonesia itself, unemployment rate has risen to between 8 and 9%. The second lesson is that the maintenance of adequate healthcare and health industry is paramount to ensure the safety and health of the population. In the fight against a pandemic, the weapons needed are protective personal equipment, masks and hand sanitizers, ventilators, drugs. The condition of limited hospitals and limited beds for COVID-19 has made the Indian government aware to immediately prepare as much as possible for the needs of rooms and beds. The Delhi government, where I live, has made cooperation with some hotels to be transformed into treatment facilities for patients of COVID-19. Meanwhile, Indian Railway has converted more than 5,000 train coaches into COVID-19 hospital and isolation centers with oxygen, ventilators, ICU wards. These are mobile hospitals that can be retained if even after the pandemic. And the staff of these train hospitals could be sourced either locally or from wherever the train is posted and stationed on a rotational basis. We learned from the Indian experience that investment in medical education and healthcare, including pharmaceutical industry, is key. In the Indian case, it has paid off. India is now on its way of becoming the pharmacy of the world. On our part, we also benefited from India's pharmaceutical industry. A number of active pharmaceutical ingredients we imported. There was a surge of imports from Indonesia, from India, in order for us to manufacture our drugs to fight COVID-19. Let me also add that 75 Indonesian citizens who were infected with COVID-19 in India also benefited from this. All of them have been treated. All of them are now well. Third lesson is that coronavirus is a common enemy that must bring out solidarity in all of us. At times of economic hardship and uncertainties brought up by crises, it's very easy to look for a scapegoat. It becomes convenient for some to fall back on identity politics and to blame other elements of society as spreader of disease. I think few countries would be innocent of this. Indonesia and India are countries of secular, pluralistic, tolerant, and democratic heritage. If we can strengthen our unity in diversity, we will have much to teach the world. But this cannot be taken for granted. It is an ongoing effort, it's an ongoing endeavor. Civil society organizations and activists, along with governments, they have essential role to play to protect citizens' rights and the rule of law. Now, to my mind, the fourth lesson is the importance of information and information technology. These play a crucial role in keeping our society functional, and this has been especially highlighted during lockdowns and quarantines. The ongoing pandemic has made millions of people around the world adapt with new reality and change their day-to-day routines, including understanding the importance of hygiene. The media, both mainstream media and social media, they also play an essential role. Intensive communication and open information are key to tackling the challenges brought about by this pandemic. Transparency and freedom and maturity of the press are some of the role of media during difficult times. Avoiding and suppressing fake news must also be part of this role. Next, civil society and organization, they also have a role in promoting health awareness, in promoting solidarity, and they play a key role in particular where governments cannot fill in that role. We know that many governments are caught unprepared in this. All of us are trying. It is not for want of trying, but we are simply unprepared. Therefore, civil society organizations also play a key role. But above all, we all now realize the importance of a healthy environment for human health. This pandemic that has brought the world to a halt has also shown us that Mother Nature cannot be taken for granted because our systems, our economic system, political, security, are all vulnerable to changes in our physical environment. We have been reminded and we are relearning how close humanity is related to Mother Nature. For people of my generation, this is our first experience with a pandemic of such magnitude. And I've lived for long enough. Now for your generation, the students, the youths, and the children of today, this will not be your last. You will probably see more of such crises because of the climate crisis and the stress that we have put on the environment. It is with all of you that the answer to the coming crisis will rest with. I therefore encourage you who have studied and know other countries, who have lived in other countries, to strengthen the relationship that you have built. The issues facing countries and societies today, health security, food security, energy security, water security, all of these cannot be addressed from behind the borders of nation states. They require stronger international cooperation. I'm very pleased that our youth and students are taking this initiative because the future belongs to them. They have to take ownership of that future. Thank you.
Thank you very much for His Excellency, Mr. Sidharto, for his highly interesting presentation. I think I thoroughly enjoyed that. And first of all, I would like to say personally that I am happy that the sky in Delhi has been clearer in the past few days. I do believe that we need more positivity in this time of the pandemic. For our audience at home, His Excellency, Mr. Sidharto, has highlighted some key points from his presentation that I would like to point out. The first is that, and I do agree with this, there is no right answer to solving this issue. There isn't really a one-size-fits-all solution. What works for one region cannot necessarily work for a different region, considering the different environment and socio-economic issues that each country face. And secondly, the lesson that we can take, I think, and I do agree with you, the COVID-19 pandemic has emphasized the existing social inequalities that exist in India, but also I believe this is the rest of the world as well. And therefore, having unity and diversity is important. And there is also importance in ICT and digital technology. And I believe that with this pandemic, we can move on realizing that there are still so many aspects or areas in different regions where we still need to improve. And so perhaps moving forward, we can continue to improve what we are lacking towards a better future. And lastly, he has also expressed the roles of press and human rights activists or civil rights activists in overcoming this issue. And the last part, which I think is for every student who are watching from home today, and thank you, sir, for the reminder on your last point. This crisis, this COVID-19 pandemic will not be the last. There will be more crises in the future, as much as we would like to avoid them, hopefully. And as young students, as future leaders for the next generation, it will be our roles one day to take ownership to our future, very much as you have mentioned. Thank you very much. For our audience at home, we will continue to the following session, which is the discussion session. And I invite Mr. Andi and Mr. Wajid to join us back to the screen. To Mr. Andi and Mr. Wajid. If you could kindly join us. I think they're coming. All right. As we wait for Mr. Andi and Mr. Wajid, there is one thing that I'd like for you, Mr. Sidharto, if you could kindly elaborate a little bit further. You've mentioned earlier about how the press and the civil rights activist groups have a very have an importance in making sure that we can move past this crisis. In what ways do you think civil rights activists or human rights activists, not in India, but in Indonesia, in what ways do you think with a lot of barriers that we have going on right now between countries due to the travel restrictions, how do you think we can help? You know, how this partnership with Indonesia can help the situation in India and vice versa?
This is between human rights activists?
Yes, mostly and more specifically human rights activists, but perhaps if we can go beyond that, if you could kindly let us know.
Yes. I think we, both countries, by virtue of its diversity, pluralism, tolerance, I think around the world, not only uniquely in India and Indonesia, around the world, there is also a rising tide of intolerance, of identity politics. So both countries, there are similarities that we share in that we have this long tradition of tolerance. And I think in the case of Indonesia, when we face intolerance, we face identity politics, we fall back on that long tradition. We have confidence in our tradition, and there are many manifestations of that. So this is something that I'd like to see more conversations between India and Indonesia, conversations about strengthening tolerance, how to benefit from diversity. And I think specifically between youths, I think we don't currently have a specific platform for India-Indonesia Youth Dialogue. We have an India-ASEAN Youth Dialogue, but specifically on India-Indonesia, I think there are a number of issues that they can exchange views. I'm pretty sure that there are a number of things that Indonesian students can learn from their Indian counterparts. One issue that immediately comes to mind is on the legal system and the legal views. India, because of its the nature of its country, how uninterrupted its system of governance since independence until today has been uninterrupted. There's a strength in its legal system, in particular its Supreme Court. It's reading their decisions can be very interesting, and I think youth can learn a lot from our youth. Learn from that, and the other thing is on the use of social media. How to the use of social media, mitigating fake news. I think this is some topics that such a dialogue would be very interesting to undertake.
Thank you very much, Pat Sidharto, for that answer. I do believe that social media has a huge role today, not only for press, but any kind of media, especially social media, has been a great help personally for me as a student to keep myself updated with a lot of news in the world, not only about COVID, but also about all the other humanitarian crisis that's occurring, not only in India, but also recently in Yemen, and all the other racial injustice or issues that's also happening in the US. However, one issue with this, I believe, is that with social media, it creates a lot of infodemic. So there are a lot of abundant information going on online, and we can't really tell apart which one is hoax and which one is real. And a lot of the times, as teenagers, we don't really check the sources of the information that we're getting. What can you say, or what kind of comment do you believe you can say to that, in which, how do we, as students and as all the other young generations today, how do we make sure that the use of social media is done smartly and effectively, and in ways in which the information that we get are correct?
Well, you see, I'm an old-timer, right? I began with books. This is where I'm coming from. And from books, you structure your knowledge. You structure your logic. You develop your logic on issues. And I think the strength of logic is what would help us to see through all kinds of information. Some could, it's sometimes unbelievable the amount of information that people believe, even some silly information that people would believe. So I would encourage to go beyond the 140 characters or beyond the daily news. Don't take me wrong. Every day also, my first to go news is on the internet. But also the importance of structure and knowledge. So differentiating between information and knowledge is also important. So that's one wisdom, if I may, convey from my generation to yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sidharto. I do hope that everyone watching from home today can take that advice into heart and start applying it in our lives. Before we continue with the discussion session, we believe there is a video from Mr. Sidharto that you would like for us to show.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
All right. Thank you. We will move on to showing that video, first of all, from His Excellency Mr. Sidharto, and then we will continue with the discussion session. So, Mr. Operator, if you could kindly show the video, please. All right. That was a very, I think it was a very inspiring video. I do believe that, again, even though there is no really right answer to overcoming the current issue or crisis that we have today, the best that we can do, the power that we have, is to try to help one another as much as we can. And this is my segue to asking the question of our discussion today. And I hope that His Excellency Mr. Andi and Mr. Wajid can respond. So the main question is, now that we have seen the partnership, the bilateral partnership between Indonesia and India for Syria and for Palestine and Jordan, and then for Syria as well, how has the bilateral or multilateral cooperation that your countries have engaged with, not only with Indonesia, but with other countries as well, how has these cooperations contributed to overcoming the occurring humanity crisis in your country? And especially if you could also specify with Indonesia, how has the partnership with Indonesia helped the countries mentioned, Jordan, Palestine, and Syria, overcome the crisis occurring right now? Perhaps Mr. Andi can start us off.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Zhafira. Let me address the question that you posed in the private chat. Well, indeed, during the pandemic of COVID-19, the so-called Indonesia's humanitarian diplomacy is even getting stronger and stronger. Let me give some example. Two Indonesia's leading NGOs, Nusantara Palestine Center and the Sahabat Palestina Memanggil. These two civil society organizations, they have been very generous in collaboration, of course, with the Indonesian Embassy in Amman. They donated some fund and in collaboration with one of the Jordanian charity organizations, we have, for example, distributing food package, about 600 food parcels and medicines to Palestinian refugees in Jordan. As I mentioned in my presentation, Jordan is hosting about 4 million refugees, mostly Palestinian and Syrian refugees. The other example, Ms. Zhafira, also we have seen humanitarian diplomacy conducted again in collaboration between the government through the embassy and also Indonesian NGOs in Gaza, for example. You may heard about this organization, the Indonesian Mercy or Mercy Indonesia. Despite during pandemic, they are still continuing their efforts to renovate, to expand the Indonesian hospital in Gaza. As you know, the hospital has been built back in 2010, and they need more beds in this hospital. So Mercy Indonesia, they keep staying even during pandemic in Gaza for the last maybe 14, 16 months to finalize the renovations of the Indonesian hospital in Gaza. So in sum up, Zhafira, I think the collaboration, the trilateral collaboration between Indonesia, Jordan, and Palestine through humanitarian diplomacy is even working stronger during pandemic COVID-19.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Pak Andi, for that answer. I think it is heartwarming to hear that the cooperation or the relations between Jordan, Palestine, and Indonesia is even stronger now in comparison to previously. And I do hope that moving forward, it can continue to be strong regardless of whether there is a pandemic or without. Sure. If we can move on to Pak Wajid, the same question to you, sir, but another addition perhaps is there any way that Indonesian students overseas or in Indonesia to help contribute as much as they can to these cooperation or bilateral relationship between Indonesia and Syria? Is there any way that students can help? Thank you. For Mr. Wajid, time is yours.
I hope I can catch the question properly. But considering this very fact and situation, Indonesia should lend its help for the friend who need, because it will be our form of soft diplomacy, which will generate soft power for Indonesia. And soft power will be helpful for Indonesia in the future, bilaterally or multilaterally. There were assistance, some experience. There were assistance distribution from some organization in Indonesia in coordination with the Indonesian embassy. But unfortunately, the pandemic is making the situation more difficult to channel any assistance. Since it is difficult to assist in material, Indonesia remain active supporting Syrian government in multilateral forum, namely on supporting the conflict resolution by political means and to ensure the commitment of every parties to respect Syrian sovereignty and territorial integrity and to establish the process in the way Syrian-led and Syrian-owned political solution. Acknowledge the Golan Heights territory as unseparated territory of Syrian Arab Republic and supporting the lifting of the unilateral sanction imposed on Syria amid the pandemic. And that's what my observation on the existing bilateral relationship between Indonesia and Syria.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wajid. Mr. Andi, would you like to respond?
Sorry, Mbak Zhafira, let me add something I forgot to mention.
Yes,
I think it would be unfair if I not mentioning about the role of the Indonesian Student Association in Jordan. Actually, they also involved, they also participating in humanitarian activities. Since the beginning, I started my duty here in Amman, that the Indonesian Student Associations, they have their own activities to help the brothers and sisters, refugees in Jordan. So PPI Dunia, you have to be proud that your fellow student in Jordan, they've been also very active in conducting humanitarian diplomacy by helping refugees in Jordan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Adi. That was very nice to hear. And yes, I believe as PPI Dunia, as OISAA, we're all very proud of the contributions that all of us and all the other students are trying to make, and we hope that we can continue to do this. Unfortunately, our time is up for this very interesting discussion because we have to address the questions from our audience from home. If you can look at the live comments, we can see a lot of questions and comments from our audience. So without any further ado, I pass my time to Mr. Hafizd to continue with this discussion. And yes, Mr. Wajid, if you would like to add on, please. Mr. Wajid? Would you like to add something?
Thank you so much. I would like to put this way. Yes, I would like to underline please, yes, I would like to underline I just remember the summary in my field here in, but this is conflict parties within the Syrian people. Thank you so much. This is just to add.
Thank you so much, Mr. Wajid. All right, we will move on to the Q&A session to Mr. Hafizd. My friend, Mr. Hafizd, time is yours. Once again, to Mr. Hafizd, time is yours.
Check.
If the gentleman can join us. All right.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Zhafira, Ms. Zhafira, for the time. Okay, now without waiting any longer, we are now at the question and answer sessions. For those who had written the question, I'll go ahead and read them. So as you can see, our honorable speakers from the live comment, I have collected 3 questions. Two questions is general for all of you, and 1 question is specific for our ambassador from India, Mr. Sidharto. Okay, the first question is from Fakih Al-Firdaus. My name is Fakih. I am from East Java, Indonesia. I want to ask 2 speakers, what is the role, let me translate it to English. What is the role of Indonesian students abroad in reducing conflict in several countries in the world? So as you can see at the screen, bagaimana peran mahasiswa yang lagi berada di luar negeri dalam meredam konflik beberapa negara di dunia. Okay, I would like to address this question for the first time to Mr. Andi Rachmianto. Your
Very
microphone.
pertinent.
Okay.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yeah, I can hear you.
But I think it's a good question on how a student can play a role in, let's say, not really trying to solve the conflict, but at least what my experience here in dealing in making conversations with our fellow students who are studying here in Jordan. So I always remind them that a student studying in Jordan, and Jordan is actually in a very strategic locations bordering with countries with conflict like Syria, Iraq, and Palestine. So what is important for the student is to learn, to master the knowledge about bordering countries who are now still having problem, like Syria and Palestine and also Iraq. I think this is the part of a student that they can play in trying to understand the root causes of every conflict in the world, or at least the roots of conflicts around the countries in which they are studying. For example, like our student here in Jordan. I think it's a must for the Indonesian students to learn, to master, and to have a knowledge in a very comprehensive way on the root causes of the conflict that are still happening in the neighboring countries of Jordan. So I think this is what our students can do so far in trying to understand the root causes of the conflict.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Andi Rachmianto, as your valuable information and also your great answer. And then to our next speakers, I would like to hear your answer for the previous, still our question about the roles of students in reducing the humanitarian crisis. For Mr. Wajid Fauzi.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
here in Damascus, I'm enjoying the good communication with the PPI Damascus, and I always encourage the members of PPI in Damascus to be a good face of Indonesia. What are the good face of Indonesia? Uh, it is too heavy to burden the PPI to take role in preventing the conflict, but by showing the face of Indonesia, which is tolerance, dialogue, and always in peaceful, at least this is the message to citizen, to the community where they are living, that Indonesia is promoting the way to find a solution when it conflict happen. So I always encourage the student of Indonesia in Damascus to always perform excellent in study, as tauladan, as an example, a good example for all students that Indonesia is a good people. So one of the good people, one of the face of Indonesia is tolerant. So I always encourage Indonesian student here in Damascus to perform this good morality, the good faith, and the good ethic, where the friend and the community surrounding can see by themselves how Indonesian citizen or how Indonesian people find a solution when they have any dispute or disagreement for certain thing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the valuable information from Mr. Wajid Fauzi. And then the last from Mr. Sidharto. Okay, the time is yours, sir.
I agree entirely with what Ambassador Wajid Fauzi and Ambassador Rachmianto said. There is a lot of merit in that. I think the responsibility, first and foremost responsibility of a student is to study, the main purpose why he is in a particular place, in a particular school, is to study. And therefore that is his first and foremost responsibility. And if you are studying in a foreign country, then that is even added responsibility, because you have to compete with your classmates. Now this reminds me of what my grandfather used to tell me. Now my grandfather grew up in the Dutch era. So he always tells his grandchildren, you always have to be number one. Jangan pernah mau kalah sama orang asing. So I'm now passing on that wisdom to you. It is a competition, and you have to excel. But the other thing is, while learning, also it's key that you learn about the environment you're in, the place you are in. You learn about the culture, the civilization you are in. You try to understand. Every community, every society are unique, unique history, unique, very different dynamics that is happening, and it's always, every society, every community is in a constant evolution. It's never in the same place. It's a constant evolution. So you try to understand where this society has come from and where it is going. What can you learn from it? What are the best practices that this society is doing? So I think these are important roles that Indonesian students can play in doing that. It might be the case that you also understand when it comes to social tensions, when it comes to politics, identity politics. There may be intolerance. So you also learn about these dynamics, take lessons from it. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much for all of your answers. Okay, we step to the second question. It is a question specific to Mr. Sidharto. A question from Mr. Muhammad Iksan Kiat. The question is, talking about the significance of international cooperation, is there any working group between Indonesia and India on beating COVID-19 together? So Mr. Iksan also given additional, considering some similarities between both countries, on one of which is population. Okay,
Yes.
the time is yours, sir.
Thank you. And thank you for that question kepada saudara Muhammad Iksan Kiat. We have not established a working group specifically on COVID-19. However, in terms of pharmaceutical industry, we are undertaking collaboration or cooperation, I should say, and we are linking our industries, pharmaceutical industries. So we want to go beyond not only trade, but we want to go beyond into closer cooperation into things like research and development, into exchanges, into maybe investment, collaboration. So the embassy has been active in that, in connecting the pharmaceutical industries. There is, I think there is some cutting edge for India that Indonesia can benefit from. But and this I would say across at least three issues. One is on the issue of technology itself, of the strength of the industry. Secondly, it's on how the Indian legal system would protect the pharmaceutical industry, including protecting the patents and the intellectual property rights, how to ensure that the pharmaceutical industry can provide for the population at a reasonable or even economical cost. And finally, India's medical system has made its traditional medicine a part of this, as part of the medical system. So there are Ayurveda universities, there are Ayurveda doctors. It is recognized, and I think this is something that we can also learn from the Indian case on how we can also bring our traditional medicine on a stronger platform to contribute to our health. Because I think traditional medicine has the advantage of strengthening health, strengthening immunity, based on locally sourced ingredients. So on these three sectors, we are cooperating between India and Indonesia in the pharmaceutical sector. And as lockdown is loosened up, and we are unlocking, and as flights would resume, then we'll look at how to upgrade other forms of cooperation between the two countries.
Okay, thank you, sir, for your valuable information and a nice answer. Okay, for the last question, I think I have tried that in private chat. So far, are there any obstacles in carrying out bilateral diplomacy between Indonesia and other countries? Specific in your countries, Mr. Sidharto in India, Mr. Wajid in Suriah, and Mr. Andi in Jordan, especially in humanitarian assistance. Question is specific about asking about any obstacles in carrying the bilateral collaboration and diplomacy between both countries, Indonesia and your representative country. Okay, for the first, I would like an answer from Mr. Wajid. The time is yours, sir.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Of course, actually, friends, friends indeed is friend. Friends in need is friend indeed. Well, although we are ready to provide an assistance, of course, there are some handicap, kendala, or obstacle. Say it is proximity, geographical proximity, due to the distance between Indonesia and the Middle East area, or particularly in Syria. Of course, it will affect the our capability to send any humanitarian assistance. The second is, of course, during the COVID-19, the transportation is very limited. The flight is very limited. And particularly for Syria, for Syrian borders, the border are closed. So it is not easy to transport any humanitarian assistance during this pandemic COVID. And that's why during my presentation, Indonesia is focusing on the assistance during the multilateral discussion, supporting the sovereignty, supporting the territorial integrity of Syria is very, very, very important for Syria, since during the debate in the Security Council, it is very lively, and everybody will monitor. So if we cannot transport the humanitarian assistance materially, then we support the position of country where it is needed. So it is what we need, and what we can do so far in enhancing, maintaining bilateral relationship between Indonesia and Syria.
Okay, thank you for your answer, Mr. Wajid. And then we step to our next speakers to answer the same question about asking about any obstacles that you found with, during the diplomacy between Indonesia to your representative country. Mr. Sidharto, the time is yours, sir.
Thank you. This is a very unprecedented time. Many of our citizens are caught in other countries unprepared for the pandemic, for the lockdown. Therefore, our first priority would be to our own nationals. And I think every country's priorities would be towards its own nationals. I think most countries will want to bring their nationals back home safely. So, first and foremost is humanitarian assistance towards our national. In the case of India, it was particularly, it's a unique situation where the country underwent a complete lockdown, and no international scheduled commercial flights existed since March 22nd. Even until today, there are still no international commercial scheduled flights. And India is a big country, as you can see. So how to bring them into one repatriation place has been a challenge. We managed to do it. However, we still have about 750 Indonesians that want to go home, but they have been unable to do so. And we have been encouraging further cooperation from all authorities, all relevant authorities, so we can bring our nationals home after so many months in India.
Okay, thank you, sir, for your valuable information and answer. And then the last an answer from Mr. Andi Rachmianto. The time is yours, sir.
Well, yes, thank you very much. I may say in the beginning of the lockdown or the curfew, we have been facing some obstacles, particularly on the movements and access of the embassy staff and also our nationals in moving from one city to another cities. However, because of our strong relations and historical relations between Indonesia and Jordan, finally we can open this access through, for example, of course, having virtual communication and dialogue. And at the end of the day, finally, the government has given access for Indonesian embassy staff to move from one city to another city in providing bansos, or cash assistance, because as you know, Indonesian nationals, they are not only living in Amman, the capital city of Jordan, but they also living in some other cities like Aqaba, Irbid, Muta, and others. And secondly, as part of again our service to protect our Indonesian nationals who have been stranded because of the lockdown policy. At the end of the day, the Jordanian government has given access, for example, using their evacuation flight to bring some Indonesians to fly back to Indonesia after the release, the relaxations of the lockdown policy. So indeed, bilateral diplomacy, in the beginning we are facing obstacles, but after 2-3 months, the obstacles can be managed and we can do our job according to our plan. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you for our honorable speakers for all of your answers. And now we are stepping to the closing statement session. I would like to give the time to each speakers to deliver their closing statement regarding to their previous presentation and question answer. For the first, I would like to address to Mr. Andi Rachmianto to carry on and give the closing statement from you. Time is yours, sir.
Well, thank you again for Pepe Dunia for inviting me to participate in this particular event. I think, as have been mentioned by all other speakers, many countries around the world, we are in the beginning, we are unprepared, we are shocking in fighting the pandemic. However, after a couple of weeks and months, every country, including our beloved country, Jordan and Palestine, they learning and they keep learning from other countries' experience. And I think this is the time also for Indonesian students around the world to learn how diplomacy in various levels, bilaterals, regional and multilateral levels, are still working even in the midst of pandemic COVID-19. So let's hope for the best. We pray together that this pandemic can be over sooner than later, and life can be normal as before the pandemic. Thank you once again for having me. Good luck. Stay healthy, stay strong, and we'll be in touch. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, sir, for your amazing closing statement. And then the second closing statement from Mr. Sidharto. You can carry on, Mr. Sidharto. Okay, the time is yours, sir.
Thank you, moderator. Thank you for having me. This has been, I find, a very useful platform. I have thoroughly enjoyed the discussion. I've thoroughly enjoyed the presentations made by Ambassador Wajid, Ambassador Andi. I think it brought three very different perspectives, three very different experiences in dealing with COVID-19. And I congratulate PPMI Dunia for pulling this together. I hope the audience would have enjoyed it as much as I did. I hope all of you, especially the younger generation, can draw lessons, even though what you've heard in the past 1.5 or 2 hours would be barely enough to gain much wisdom. However, I hope this will be a start, and I encourage PPMI Dunia to continue with its endeavors, to continue with building bridges, and not to hesitate to make use of people like us whenever we can be supportive of your endeavors. We will be there for you. So thank you very much, and congratulations to PPMI Dunia.
Okay, thank you, sir, for your enormous closing statement. And then the last closing statement, we would like to hear from Mr. Wajid Fauzi. Okay, the time is yours, sir.
Thank you. I would like to congratulate the organization Overseas of Indonesian Student Association, ALIAN, PPMI Dunia, for organizing excellent webinar today. And I hope that this will be our venue, our new normal avenue, new normal way of silaturahmi between us, between the Indonesian people overseas. And as well as, I believe it is also attended by our fellow Indonesian citizen in Indonesia too. On behalf, as Ambassador of Indonesia, I would like to use this opportunity to convey my best regard, or the best regard from the Indonesian citizen in Syria, particularly the PPI Damascus, to all of you, to all Indonesian people all over the world, with the very big hope and message that let us compete each other to perform our best, to do our best, to serve our country, and to dedicate our integrity and capability, whoever we are, whatever our position, and whatever our destination. So let us compete each other to perform our best to serve, to make Indonesia excel, great, and advanced country. Let us thank you so much, and thank you once again for the opportunity.
Okay, thank you, sir, for your tremendous closing statement from you. Okay, thank you for all of the honorable speakers. Thank you for excellent presentation. Thank you for all of your excellent answer. And then next session, I will give the time to my friend, Ms. Zhafira Aqyla, to give a short conclusion about the whole agenda. And at the same time, it will be our last session of our event. The time is yours, Ms. Zhafira.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hafizd, and Your Excellencies for your time. Unfortunately, everyone who is watching at home, our time is up. However, we are extremely grateful for the interesting discussion that we had today. And together with the ambassadors of Indonesia from Jordan and Palestine, India and Bhutan, as well as Syria, today's session have highlighted the current ongoing humanitarian crisis in the world, but more specifically around Asia. Their Excellencies Pak Andi, Pak Wajid, and Pak Sidharto encourages all of us students and audience at home to collaborate together at a national, bilateral, and multilateral level to see the end of this pandemic. However, we hope that collaboration can continue beyond this pandemic to achieve bigger and better goals in the future. Thank you very much, everyone, and we return this event to the Master of Ceremony, Ms. Mutiara, and she will close our great agenda today. To Ms. Mutiara, time is yours. Ms. Mutiara, we will use your microphone. Thank you.
All right. We are already heard a lot of valuable information. as well as with a great discussion from our speakers. So I would like to thank you all. Thank you for all the speakers, Mr. Andi Rachmianto and Mr. Wajid Fauzi, as well as Mr. Sidharto Reza Suryodipuro, Ambassador of Indonesia to Jordan and Palestine, Ambassador Indonesia to Syria, and also Ambassador of Indonesia to India, as well as our moderator, Ms. Zhafira Aqyla and Mr. Hafizd Lubis, as well as our viewers who were willing to
Hello,
attend.
Mr. Mutiara.
Yeah.
Your microphone, we cannot hear you.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay. Okay. Once again, I would like to thank you all. Thank you very much for the all
We still
speakers.
cannot hear you, Miss Muti. Sorry.
Okay.
I think we can hear you.
Oh.
We can hear you. Yes.
Okay.
Everyone can hear me?
Carry on.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. And of course, to all viewers who were willing to attend from the beginning to the end of the event, a high appreciation to all organizations, committee, and our supporting team, as well as our media partner. Before I close the event, I would like to inform you once again that we are also raising funds for COVID-19, especially for our medical team who are at the forefront in fighting COVID-19. If you want to donate, please refer to the bank account, or you can just scan the barcode on your screen. And yeah, thank you so much for all you have that already contributed to the donations. Don't forget that we still have a lot of events in the next 2 days. Okay, and then yeah, see you again in the next event. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you so much for all.
Terima kasih Pak Arto, Pak Wajid.
Waalaikumsalam.
Pak Wajid, sampai jumpa.
Terima kasih. Sampai ketemu lagi.
Thank you so much. Terima kasih Pak
Terima kasih
Sidharto.
Mbak Zhafira, Mbak Muti.
Terima kasih. Take care.
Sampai jumpa Pak Dubes.
Stay healthy, stay united.